Radio Okitalk, Radio Okitalk, von Mensch zu Mensch.
Welcome to Team Rabbit Hole Edition 183, the Gene Keymaker, Richard Rudd, author, teacher, mystic, award-winning poet. Join the team as we get to know this Richard, a Brit with a Virgo stellium, responsible for bringing to the world the famous gene keys. Well met and welcome, Richard.
Great, thanks. Nice to be here with you guys.
Definitely. It is 12:12 here in Colorado where I live, so very serendipitous timing here. So this is a 183rd episode that will reduce down to 3 numerologically, which is the Empress card. And according to David DeAngelis, who has done the Starman Tarot deck, he's been on the podcast a few times, it says, I fully embrace life's rich fecundity. The Empress card is saying everything is possible. Allow abundance into your life, tap into the creative flow of the universe, and start something nurturing. Raphael, what would the Galactic Heritage card be?
So these are Lissa Royal Holt's Galactic Heritage cards. We have now number 75, Earth, Melting Pot, Future Timeline. Unity from diversity is one of the most powerful evolutionary ideas for a species. Humanity is an amalgamation of many diverse ET species. It is a direct reflection of the galactic community. Once humankind begins to fully embrace those who are different and sees itself as one people, it will be ready to join the galactic community. This card reminds you that beyond race, gender, skin color, and beliefs, all beings come from the same source. Humans must transcend the fear of those who are different and extend their hearts to all beings in order for this necessary evolutionary step to be activated.
So I'm curious, Richard, between those cards, if anything resonated for you.
Yeah, that last one especially, I think that reminds me of my work and the vision behind it. You know, that combining, you know, that unifying of the opposites and the beauty of diversity. Yeah, that's definitely a part of my work with the gene keys and in the world. Yeah.
So I do want to get into the gene keys quite obviously, but I'm curious kind of as to how you got to where you are. I've read a couple tales, even on your website. It's like, you know, you had a magical mystical experience at one point that kind of uploaded what became the gene keys. So as long-winded or as short-winded as you prefer, kind of give us Call Me Ishmael, you know, moment and kind of situate us into how you got onto the path of your present moment.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I guess, you know, I had a fairly standard, privileged English upbringing with private schooling and stuff, and you know, really good schooling actually. But yeah, I guess after that was all finished, and I got to university, I went to Edinburgh University, which is a great place, doing English and philosophy. And while I was there, I fell in with some interesting characters who kind of had a big influence on me. And I had my first experiences of energy in the body, like energy moving through my body, which I, you know, kind of, I guess back then it was a bit freaky for me because I didn't have a reference, but it just suddenly happened. And I'd met some guys.
Had you not done psychedelics or anything like that before this?
I'd done a little bit of mushrooms with my friends at university, you know, but no, it wasn't that kind of thing. It was energies that started to move through my body, on the inside, you know, and I could feel them really clearly, and I could feel sort of blockages in that, and I didn't really have a reference because most of the people I was hanging out with, that wasn't, you know, they didn't understand. But I went to a yoga teacher, and she helped me understand it. She's, you know, so I was only like 18 or something, 19, I guess. And she helped me, and she said, "How did it start?" And I said, "Well, I had this book from a teacher called Mantak Chia, and And in the book, it described this meditation practice. And someone had given me this book, and it described this meditation practice where the initiates would go into the cave for 100 days, and they do this practice called the microcosmic orbit, opening the orbit. And it's like, if you know acupuncture and things like that, it's the channel that goes up the spine at the back, and then it comes over the top of your head and down through your tongue. And your tongue's kind of a switch. You put it to the roof of your mouth, and then the energy flows down the front channel and then loops back up the spine again. And that's called the Taoists call that the microcosmic orbit. And you would go into the cave for 100 days, you know, and the door would be sealed, and you'd do your practice until you'd open that orbit. Anyway, so this teacher brought this teaching out, you know, it was like a secret teaching, and then he published it, and it was with diagrams and everything. And I got hold of that book, and I sat there, you know, and this orbit just instantaneously opened up in me. And, you know, so it was no like 100 days. Maybe I'd done my 100 days in my last life or something. But it just... I was
going to say, you are a Virgo stellium. You have more than one personal planet. And the Virgo is the hermit card. So going off into a cave for 100 days, it's right up your alley naturally. So maybe you did do this.
Well, I'm glad I didn't have to. But it confused the hell out of me, because suddenly I had the moment after I'd done that meditation, and I'd experienced the energy coming through my tongue. It was like that switch. After that moment, I could feel energy for the rest of my life. You know, it didn't stop. Before that moment, I didn't, or I wasn't aware of it. And so anyway, so the woman, this yoga teacher, said to me, "Well, why don't you find the guy who wrote the book?" And that hadn't really occurred to me. And
how practical.
Yeah. And anyway, so I did, and there was no internet back then. And so I found out where he was, and he was teaching in the US actually. And so as it happens, I was on, it was in 1992, and there was this incredible tall ships race sailing across the Atlantic Ocean. And I managed to get on several, you know, boats. And so I sailed to America. So that's the first time I'd been to America. But I got there by
I just want to say how magical the story is already. It's like most people are like, yo, I got on a plane or whatever. It's like you're going to the root of the tree of the source of the knowledge that you've like become Gnostic, you know, aware about, but also a transatlantic journey that most monkeys probably will never understand.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And so I sailed across. It took a couple of weeks, and I sailed across the ocean. And then I switched, you know, I had a lot of adventures. I fell in love. It was the quintercentenary of Christopher Columbus' discovery of America. Well, we know that it wasn't discovered by him, but, you know, that was, so there were a lot of ships sailing across, and there was this whole kind of carnival atmosphere in each port that you stopped in. And anyway, so it was an amazing experience, and I switched boats in different ports until it was quite random, and then I'd stay in certain places in the islands, but eventually I made my way up to New York, and I had this wonderful experience of sailing past the Statue of Liberty, and then sailing into New York, and that was where Mantak Chia was teaching in upstate New York. So my timing was really good. And he was teaching this huge course of 7 or 8 weeks long, teaching all kinds of Taoist secret arts. And I had signed in for these 2 weeks in the middle, doing a thing called Chine Sang, which is I had no idea about this, and I signed straight in for something quite sophisticated, because that was the thing that I thought I felt drawn to, and it was like working in the belly with your hands, and I just thought that sounded.
The stomach does rule Virgo, so it's not terribly. I'm just like, wow, this sounds like. I just, not to sidetrack you, considering how practical you probably are. Like, did you find it like super magical, the synchronicities of just hitching rides, and obviously even the Empress card kind of resonates with the Lady Liberty in the sense it's like, give me your poor, I'll support you and nurture you. No, were you freaking out magically, or were you just like, this is how it should be? Like, how did you feel, like, phenomenologically?
Well, I guess I was young, and I was an adventurer. I still am, you know, and I just wanted an like in the old tradition of adventurers, because I read all these books when I was young about the adventurers, and I was like, I that's me, and that's why I decided to go this spontaneous route. And yeah, so it was full of enchantments and magic, and as I said, love, and all kinds of incredible experiences and people that I met, some of whom had deep effects on me, and kind of counter relationships that went on later and opened up other areas later in my life. Anyway.
So you do have a North Node in Aries. I don't know how into astrology you personally are. You're here. I mean, your destiny, your karma, dharma, however you want to put it, is to kind of cut a path for yourself, like in a warrior sense. So the fact that you resonate as a pioneering spirit, not terribly surprising. It seems like that's, you're here to do it, but also to be kind of a muse about it, like an organized poet type, more like an informer. What led you to you just kind of like opened a book and said, that's the course I'll take? Or like, was it something specific? Because before I cut you off, you were saying you didn't really grok what was going on in terms of the course.
It was new to me. I just read this one book and had this one experience. And then I kind of found out that he was teaching all these different things. And that was the one that I just felt like, okay, I'm going to sign up for that, knowing nothing about it. And it was quite an advanced technique of working, with your hands, deep tissue massage, working in the solar plexus, the belly area. It's a Chinese art called Qine Sang. It's an incredible, healing art. And anyway, so I showed up for those 2 weeks, and I had 2 weeks of that training with about, I guess, 100 other people or 150 other people in this beautiful place, upstate New York, retreat center. And immediately I was there, I felt like I was in the family. I was in family, and like fight, because the first person I met was this, he was sharing the same room as me, and he was like this. He was another guy from England. He was much older. He was an older guy, and he was a meditation teacher. And I thought, wow, a meditation teacher. How do you become one of those? It's like, because in those days, you wouldn't just, you had to actually do it. In those days, you kind of, to become a meditation teacher, you basically had to go to kind of a Buddhist monastery for 5 years, and that's how so this guy really knew his stuff. And anyway, so everyone there had this incredible story. They were all older. I was the youngest one there. And immediately several people kind of took me under their wing and kind of guided me into the field of energy medicine. And, because I had so many questions. I was like this young guy that had this awakening experience, and I had no reference and no people that I knew, who really understood. So suddenly I was for 2 weeks in this experience with all these people who had been doing it for years, Tai Chi teachers and Qigong teachers, and they'd come to study with this one man, and they'd come from all over the world. He was an extraordinary master. He still is. He still teaches, and as far as techniques go, he is the great master of the Chinese techniques. He knows more techniques than anyone on this planet. And he teaches them really well. He's a deeply practical man, and wrote all these books. And anyway,
I've definitely heard of Montauk Chia. I think I even have the Cosmic Orbit. Raphael's mentioned it
before. Probably do. And he became
Yes.
famous for the sexual teachings, of course, because that's how you become famous.
Taoist Sexual Alchemy. I think that is a book I have on my phone.
Multi-orgasmic man, and those kind of things. Which were great teachings as well. But it was more the community were incredible. And so that was my induction into this world of spirituality. It was an incredible eye-opener for me. And then I followed him after that. I became a kind of, I went and did his teacher training. I went to Thailand, and then I came back to America and did this training with him. And I learned Tai Chi and things. And then when he came to London, I hosted him and introduced him to the English, and so I got kind of involved with that, and then it kind of
not only transatlantic pioneering, inner space pioneering for y'all, your island, your home island.
Yeah, it was.
Raphael, did you want to say something? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Just briefly. So, thank you for sharing that story. I did not know, and all I can say is anyone interested in the practical side, there is a great book apparently by his first master student, let's say, Eric Judlov, called Taoist Yoga and Sexual Energy. That book is particularly great, I think, because it has wonderful illustrations. It is very practical and very simple, and I can only let's just say I have only dabbled in what you have described, but I'm very much amazed and delighted that, in a sense, this is the tradition, let's say, you're coming from, or that you've touched these realms, because this is something that has to be experienced. I just want to say that I cannot emphasize enough how relevant those ideas and techniques may be, especially if one then even just the simple meditations and exercises, and then at some point you start to feel that energy and you can activate that orbit to some extent, and it's a completely different experience of life and understanding of self. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's true. Thank you. And he laid out these, as a teacher, he laid out all these formulas where the energy was more and more refined in the higher formulas. And over the course of his life, he taught higher and higher formulas, and they were alchemical formulas of refining spiritual essence inside the body, and they were passed down. His teacher was a man called, a lovely name, the White Cloud Hermit, who literally was this great master from the mountains, and he had went and studied with him as a young boy, and learned from him, and he'd had several other kind of incredible teachers, and he'd gone off on his own quest and taken this incredible wisdom transmissions of China. And he himself was from Thailand. He was a Thai, so he had also very, I think that's why he went so kind of easily into the West, and he had such a liberal mindset around sexuality and and all those things. So he wasn't kind of as trapped in tradition. And I think many of the Chinese teachers were really outraged that he was writing all these secrets and just publishing them to the West. And his teachings, they caught on like wildfire in the West. And they're still, they're some of the best-selling books of of all these kind of energy medicines in the world, really. Yeah, so and I moved on.
It reminds me a little of the other card, the melting pot, like it was, right? It's like, seems like this is another level of it, where various traditions, were you just drawn to Eastern things? Do you feel like you were a Taoist in a past life? Like, what turned you onto this kind of path? I mean, obviously, any path is how you do it. So, I mean, I'm a postmodern at that level, but I'm kind of curious, like, what were the things that were resonating to the degree that you felt like inclined in that direction?
Yeah, I think, I'm drawn to many paths, and this has been sort of a central core path in my life. And the Chinese, those mountains. Funnily enough, in all my travels around the world, I've still never been to China, and I find that as like
Richard,
because I've been everywhere.
Ironic.
Yeah, it's almost like if I go
it's on
there,
the to-do list.
Yeah, well, it's a strange. It's waiting for its time. And of course, the Gene Keys is based on the I Ching, which is straight, the central transmission from, the Chinese culture, spiritual transmission. But it's
I actually pull hexagrams every morning, and this morning I pulled 55, which is in my hologenetic profile. But that's a big deal in the Gene Keys, which I do want to get into, 22, 55, things like that. But I'm interested in like the formulation of the stalactite of who you are. So keep going with what happened after New York. I mean, and all this stuff. You did this London shindig.
Yeah, I guess I finished out my my degree, and I continued traveling in my 20s. I went to India, and I picked up those transmissions, and I went to, and I met some great Tibetan lamas and things, and the Dalai Lama himself, and hung out in Dharamsala, and, I picked up that kind of trail around the world of just like finding different sacred places and teachings. Anyway, the flow of the Tao, if you like, brought me back to New York, about, I don't know when that was, probably in my mid-20s. Well, I should go back a little bit, because I was living at the time in Scotland, and I had this little cottage in the Highlands, because I was given some money, and I bought this little cottage in the Highlands, high up in one of the remote mountain glens, they're called, valley. And it was a very cheap little kind of stone cottage, really beautiful, like you might see in the movies, like Highlander or something. And I went up there. I would go from Edinburgh, and I'd go at the weekends, and I'd go sometimes in the holidays for like 2 or 3 months, and I'd live up there in the wilds. And I'd invite people up, and lots of people started coming up because I was doing spiritual practice up there, and people heard about the Taoists, and I was a Mantak Chia. I was teaching this stuff I brought it with me, and I was a teacher. I was certified by Mantak, the master.
We're a hermit card.
Yeah.
You were doing it. Like,
so
you had the info, but you were willing to teach.
Yeah, so there I was, this kind of guy in the mountains doing this, and people started coming. People heard about me, strangers, they heard and they came. Anyway, one day, an unusual man rang me up, traveling from Australia, and he said, "I've heard about you. I've heard about your teachings, and I'm also a student of Mantak Chia, among other things, and I'd love to come and see you." So I said, "Yeah, sure, come on up." And anyway, this man appeared, and he really changed my life. I was in my 20s. He was in his early 40s. And he kind of came and he looked at me, and he was an incredible shaman. And he said, "I can really help you in the next phase of your spiritual evolution." And I said, "Okay." And he said, there's blockages in you that you need to get through. I was still wet behind the ears, if you know what I mean. I had a lot of knowledge and wisdom, but I emotionally, I was pretty screwed up still. And this man had seen this. And so he kind of took me through incredible practices, like with the body, like cleansing practices, like we would drink boiling salted water and then just vomit, in the mornings. And then we would
That's hardcore.
Yeah, we do these hardcore cleanses. He was when he was 18, he'd won an Olympic gold medal as a swimmer in Australia. So he knew about like the breath. That was his thing. He knew the breath. And so he really took me through, like, this is how the breath works, because you've got all this knowledge from the Taoists, but I'm going to actually show you how the breath really works. And so in the winter, we would go up into the mountain valleys, and we got hold of kilts. That was the thing. He said, "Let's go to Edinburgh." And we went and bought a whole load of secondhand kilts. And then we put on these kilts, and we would run barefoot with these kilts on and our big thick jumpers, running through the mountains, in the forests, in the rain and in the ice and stuff. And one day he took us to this, I had this waterfall that I'd found up there. It was this beautiful waterfall, and it had a kind of double waterfall. And the top waterfall, it had this little one that you could kind of swim in the summer. It was really cold. Anyway, we went up there in the winter, and he said, "Come, we're going in there. We've got to go in there." And I said, "You're kidding." And before I knew it, he was in. And it was winter, and it was really cold. I mean, cold like you've never known, and unless you've done that kind of thing. And then that became a thing, that we'd go there at night in the winter, and we'd jump into the blackness, in the night. And I mean, just to even take your clothes off in that environment is kind of a powerful thing to do. And so people would come up from London and stuff, and then we'd take them on this initiation. We'd give them a kilt, and we'd say, "Right, we're going out into the wild." And they were like, "Who are these guys?" and I got tough. I really became tough. My body became strong. My energy body became really powerful through doing these. And we would meditate, and we ate vegetables, and we drank very clear, clean water from the mountain streams, and we lived a pure life, the Taoist life. And this guy, he helped also me move through some emotional things. I remember one day, these are strange stories, but I remember one day he he was asking about my schooling, and he said, "Tell me more about your schooling and stuff." And so I would tell a story and tell him about, because I went to boarding school, and he'd say, "Okay," and then, what was this? Were you a sporty guy? I said, "No, not really. I hated sport." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "That's this. Tell me more about that." And eventually he kind of wheedled out of me that my deepest fear was cross-country running at the school, because as a punishment we were made to kind of run with bricks above our heads at dawn in the morning, and it was kind of primitive.
I was gonna ask if it was very Pink Floyd, The Wall, like boarding school style, and you're saying you literally ran with bricks above your head, so that's kind of funny.
Hello?
Yes, you're here.
Yeah,
Yes,
we
yes.
hear you.
I think we just had a break. Yeah.
Your stories are lighting up the internet. Everyone's getting the real Highlander cross-country experience.
Anyway,
So, yeah, it sounds like your boarding school like days, like I was saying, I don't know if you heard, was very Pink Floyd, Wallish. Like, I mean, as an American between C.S. Lewis and like whatever 80s, 90s culture, I kind of have an idea of what it might be, but it seems like there was some blockages there.
So he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to take you on a cross-country run," and we went down to the bottom of the track, and he got in. We had a Jeep, an old Land Rover, and he got in the Land Rover, and he said, "Okay, you're going to run up that mountain," and he followed me in the Land Rover, and he became this kind of Gestapo guy. He just started screaming at me using my surname. He said, "Get up that hill! If you stop, you're going, I'm going to hit you." And he just drew, and the fear of God was in me. It brought back all my fears, and I ran all the way up that hill. And when I got to the top, I was sick. I was vomited. But it totally, like, it sounds kind of mean, but it really pushed something through me. And immediately we got to the top, he said, "Right, come inside." We came inside the house. And he said, "Now breathe only through your nostrils." And I was so exhausted, and I was breathing really deeply. And we went into this deep kind of circular breathing, and we went into an incredibly powerful meditation where my heart just burst open, and like something really powerful was healed in me. And so he knew just how to push you across the edge of your comfort zone, and he helped me in lots of ways to kind of get past powerful issues, and so he was my shaman for some time, and eventually that phase ended, and he invited me to New York, and that's how I found my way back to New York, and I lived in New York for a while, and I did my Chino Sang there that I'd learned which is the belly work with my hands, body work, and so I became really well known in New York as this healer.
Like upstate New York or New York City?
No, in New York City.
That's interesting. So this was like the mid 90s?
Yeah, this is like mid 90s, and his girlfriend was a model, like a really well known model, really beautiful, and she knew all the kind of people in New York. So like suddenly I was this. I came from being this kind of hermit to being this renowned healer. And she set me up in their house in Manhattan, and people would, people were coming to have my belly work, and they were paying a lot of money. She was the kind of my agent, and she just said, "Look, I'm going to sort it all out for you. All you do is do your magic, and I'm going to bring them." And so suddenly I was this, suddenly there were movie stars and kind of other, all sorts of people, amazing people coming, and I was working on them in a very profound way. And I'd had this training, so I had this incredible energy in my hands from this inner work, and I knew these techniques that Mantak Chia had taught me, and I also was beginning to innovate my own by then, and so people had a lot of powerful breakthrough experiences under my hands, a lot of deep issues were healed in people, and my name got around for a while. And it did kind of, in the end, I'd kind of almost burnt out. I've been in New York for like 9 months doing that, and I'd never been in a city that long because I grew up in the country, and I just one day said to her name was Angel. I just said, come on, I need to get out now, and I left and went off traveling, and I didn't come back. So this guy in New York, the healer, was suddenly gone. and another chapter opened. But that was all part of my journey and my story. Seems a long time ago now. It's my pre-Saturn cycle, before my Saturn return.
You get it. Yeah, I was going to say, when you said you were like 1920s, I was like, oh, you weren't even 28 yet, man.
Yeah. And it was...
So as far as...
it all changed. Saturn return, yeah.
Yeah, it does. That's an understatement. It sounds like, speaking of Saturnian kind of teaching, when the student's ready, the master appears. It sounds like you've really lived that kind of life very succinctly. As far as him kind of being a fascist or whatever, trying to get you up the hill. It seems I don't know if he's going to be doing that for everybody. It seems he heard what your trigger was and then pushed you through the portal of that pain to the degree where it became weaponized, or you confronted it fully, or however you want to look at it. So I would like to think he's not using that as his Tybo strategy or whatever, but it sounds like he found the magic for your algorithm and was like, yo, we need to go deep into that portal. As far as Manhattan in the 90s, you might have heard of Tim Keller and Redeemer Presbyterian Church. My grandparents helped found that church, so they were up in the Manhattan in the late 80s and early 90s. So probably around the same time you're up there. I'm not from New York City, but I've been up to Central Park and FAO Schwartz and the whole deal a bunch of times.
It's a great time to be there.
Oh, that city's insane, especially back then. It was the internet hadn't really taken off, so it still had this organic kind of grime to it. But it wasn't
safe. It was more edgy.
Exactly.
Yeah, there were characters, all over. There were amazing characters on the streets that we became friends with, and it was quite a time.
So was it weird? I've not run it. I think of you as a celebrity, but this isn't really freaking me out because I'm on a phone and it's like I'm just chilling in my bed, kind of shooting the shit. Did you ever have starstruck moments, giving belly rubs to Madonna or whatever? What was that like? Did that get old quickly? Did you enjoy that kind of scene, or how'd that work?
I kind of loved it. It was sort of I just fell into it. I didn't kind of buy it fully, actually, because there was always this part of me that thought, I can do this. I want to do this to ordinary people, as well. But for the time, it was like I was well into it. There was a lot of money coming in. We lived well. We lived a kind of paradoxical life of we were Taoist hermits in the city of New York, but we also went out and we bought beautiful clothes, and we went out and we dined well, and we drank wine, and at the same time we were doing spiritual practice, very intense spiritual practice. But that was one of the things that my teacher really taught me, is that you can. He was quite into Osho. That was one of his big influences, and Rajneesh, and Rajneesh's great kind of teaching was bringing the paradoxes together. That you can live a very amazing kind of life in the middle of the world, and yet you can be incredibly spiritual at the same time. And so,
right, a lot of people tend to think hypermaterialism isn't woke or something, and it's weird because it takes all kinds. And you can't really judge a book by the cover. I think there's probably how would I say themes that might come up, like distractions or something, but it depends on one's, I guess, in not only their integrity, but their what's the word, their and what they're trying to do with it. Speaking of the paradox, because I think life is a paradox. Yeah, intention. Thank you. I was like, I know it's an I word. Why is it evading me? The intentions kind of color it. How do you and we could just kind of open up a warm. Well, I'm kind of curious in terms of how you started kicking off into the writing and the poetry words and stuff like that. But how do you deal with the idea of paradox as a double Gemini? I'm always telling my fiance, and your gene keys say the word paradox probably more than any book I've ever read, which I highly appreciate. It's it's both and. It's not either or. There's a simultaneity. It's not, you can be rich and famous and woke, or you can be a hermit and be miserably far from spirit at that level. So how do you kind of with that specific, maybe the New York kind of like Upper East Side scene or whatever was going on. How did you not justify, because that seems like you have to have to have a defense, but how did you reconcile the paradox in your own mind?
I think, it was like riding the edge, so we really rode the extremes, so we were, and the paradox, like this man was a master of paradox, so we would be wearing like beautiful suits, and then one day he'd climb up into a dumpster, on the street, and he'd say, let's go in there. And I'd say, in this gear? It's like, come on. And we jumped down one time I swear this is a true story. We jumped down into this dumpster and where people had just put their garbage. And I was like, okay. And I just learned to kind of follow him. And magic happened. And he was like looking through the garbage and looking for stuff to, recycle or anything. And then he picked up a bag of trash and he threw it over to me. He said, like, open that up. And I was like, I'm not opening that. He said, just do it. And
this is like a Virgo's worst nightmare for the record. They're like clean, organized. This is like, let's go into the dirty trash of Manhattan.
Anyway, I swear this is true. I opened up this trash bag and it was filled with wrapped up presents. Unopened. Like beautifully wrapped presents. That's
crazy.
Yeah.
Talk about like hyperdimensional weirdness. I know. I don't know if he knew that, but
he looked at me and he said, don't ever forget the symbol of this, And
if you could, it's not a gene key probably, but if you could, I see what you're saying poetically, but like, how would you describe the metaphor of the meaning of that moment? Like, how are you remembering that?
It's my life now, isn't it? The shadow is in the gift is in the shadow, like the gift is in you. So you've got to go into that trash in order to kind of find those secret, beautiful things. And you know what we did with those presents? We didn't open any of them. We took them with us. And we went back home, and then we went out onto the street, and we invited all the people we knew from the street to come for a party, and we laid on drink, and we made nice food, and we had all these raggedy people come in, and we gave them all these presents, and we didn't know what was
That's what's up. Yeah, I was gonna say worst case scenario is like a sex shop had like gone out of business or something crazy.
No, it was like books and videos and kind of it was like stuff. It was nice stuff, some pens and, some divorce that had gone wrong or, something. It was something. Yeah.
One man gathers what another man spills, as they say. So that is good on you for kind of tying it into your work where it's like, the gift is in the shadow. Literally the gift wraps are in the shadow of the dumpster possibly.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, those were part of my early kind of trainings, I guess.
It seems you look at life, and obviously, like life is life, but you kind of approached it like a dojo. It seems like you're willing to go through the levels of initiation. Not everybody chooses that pre-incarnationally. I'm not sure about your presuppositions, but it seems like you've kind of, with especially in North Node and Aries and all this Virgo, it's like you're here to master kind of data in a practically embodied way, if that makes sense. So we've got up to mid New York. Like, I'm kind of curious, when did you start being like, well, first of all, you majored in English and stuff like that. Had you been making poetry this whole time? Were you being creative like on the side?
Yeah, particularly when I was I think it was the Chinese poet in me, like when I'm up in the mountains, the poet, and especially if I'm on my own, that poetry just kind of stirs in my soul, and that's when I started writing. When I was up there in my own in that little cabin, and I realized I could write poetry, and it sounded good. I was like, I was in love with the sound of it in English. That's and the shapes and the textures. My early ones were a little bit, kind of rough, but then I started to.
You can forgive yourself. It is a process.
I started to create poems that were I thought were really quite beautiful, and it was very pleasurable. And I didn't kind of, I waited for them to come. I've always been like that. I waited for poems to come. I didn't kind of, like some poets have a practice where they go, I'm going to write a poem every day, and that's like a certain discipline as a kind of dharma that they do. And it's because I'm not a kind of poet as a life journey. I'm a poetic man. I didn't ever feel the need for that. So I haven't written vast amounts of poetry. I've just been there when certain poems have arrived and at different times, and they've helped me. Like when my mother died, I mean, kind of a decade ago, writing a poem was the best way that I could kind of, I don't know, encapsulate that grief and that celebration of her life. And I read that poem at her, and I knew I was writing a poem to read at her memorial service. And so, things like that, like they can be really beautiful ways of processing deep spiritual soul emotions. So yeah, I've always loved that. But I'm not so much a poet as I think that's as a poetic person, and I try and encourage that in others as well. You don't have to be able to write, or you don't have to be a master of language. It's the way you look at life. It's the way you receive life in a poetic way, in an aesthetic way, so that you appreciate what comes your way.
I can very much appreciate that. It's funny, I had kind of a Kundalini awakening in high school, and I didn't have the mentors running through the hills like you did. I wish I did, but hey, I guess I signed up for the jump out out of parachute Dharma or whatever. So I was kind of freaking out and not really cogent, but like lucid simultaneously. It was really bizarre. And I remember this is in high school, right? So like I'm not in college or anything yet, which I dropped out of for art history. So I get the poetic thing is kind of what I'm getting at with this. But I was at my friend's hanging out with my friend, and his parents were doing dinner or whatever. And they're like, "So what are you trying to do with your life?" And I remember it was almost like channeling, kind of sounds like woo, but I don't really know how to explain it. But it's like something from the depths of me was like, I want to be a poet. I don't write poetry, right? Like I might mess with haikus occasionally, but I kind of understand at a fundamental kind of core level what you mean, where it's like there's a beautiful aesthetic, potentially linguistic, but not necessarily a way of kind of floating through the Tao. And it seems kind of you're on that trip. So so it seems like you're a hobbyist, but you've gotten awards for it. What's up with that?
Yeah, that was, I wrote some, I remember when I sailed, another time when I sailed across the Atlantic, I wrote a poem, because you'd gaze at the sea for hours and hours on end, and I wrote this one poem. Anyway, I'd been away, and I met my wife when I was around 29, and then my life changed from that point and became much more embedded and structured. And she kind of said, "I've sent off one of your poems to a couple of your poems to this thing." I said, "Oh, well, that's really nice thought. It was some competition." She said, "I just saw it, and so you weren't here." And I thought, "I'm just going to do it for you, and you never know." And we went away somewhere. I can't remember. We went away traveling and came back, and there was all these messages on my machine saying, "You've been given the poetry, the first prize in this poetry award for your poem, one of your poems you submitted." And they'd had these two judges. One was a woman, one was a man, and they had, I don't know how many thousands of poems sent in. And it was in Ireland. It's this beautiful place in Ireland, the south of Ireland, the land of poetry. And they'd sifted through all these poems, and the two of them had come separately to their list, and they'd seen which ones they both loved. And they got it down to sort of 5 or 6 poems, and then they both agreed that my poem, the one I'd written, was their favorite. And so I had these calls, and then I was flown out to Ireland to receive this kind of award, and in this beautiful festival in the south, a town called Bantry. And I'd never been to Ireland either, and I'd always, the poet in me had always wanted to go to Ireland, and so to me it felt like receiving a poetic knighthood, being given in Ireland, the land where poetry drips from the trees, and by 2 Irish poets, who had considered all these poems, many of them Irish, and chosen this one Englishman. And I was so honored. I cannot tell you how honored I felt and how humbled I felt. in that room.
When the wife pulls through during a Saturn return, I might add. So it's like, that was heavily karmic stuff. I'm not like a Joycean by any means, but my way, I was gonna kind of, this makes sense now. We might as well go this direction. Language as a substrate to reality. Finnegan's Wake I haven't totally read or anything like that, but I've come to it through the Marshall McLuhan kind of Terence McKenna angle. I'm kind of wondering how you view language. I mean, obviously, Gene Keys, ATGC, this gets into like the language of our biology in a very materially reductionistic way. Presuming you're not. I mean, I don't know if you think we're in this like dream fractal. Like it seems like you're more magical than not, but it also seems you're very practical, very Virgoan. Not too surprising given your chart. How do you look at the function of language? Like you're talking about poetry, but you're also very, it seems, succinctly aware of the role it plays in our design, even just in terms of like I was saying, genes. What do you think language is? Do you think it's something like a fluke? Do you think this is a substrate of reality? Like, how do you feel about language?
And just briefly before you answer, I'd like to say that, I mean, right now I'm still reading, of course. There was a time when I would say I've read plenty more books, or, there's a phase in life for everything. And then, you sift through maybe even French philosophy and so on, and you realize, oh, it takes like 100 pages to get to the gist of it that could have been put on one page, which is then I enjoy channels like Daryl Anka with Bashar or Lissa Royal or many others that seem to put things, just much more simply. And then yours was one of the books I came across. It was like, oh, that's a huge tome. So of course I'm going to start reading my own Gene Keys. And I was truly like very much delighted when I was reading, and I was like, oh, so nice. This totally makes sense. There is no superfluous text. It makes sense both from a psychological and spiritual perspective, from my point of view, of course. So I just like to thank you for creating that particular tome, and you may like to tie that process somewhat into your answer in regards to language.
Thank you, Raphael. Yeah, I think what I have learned now, I don't know if I knew it back then, is that language, all language, it comes from a common language, that is a kind of language of light, that is an interdimensional kind of fractal language, and it's embedded in the nature of reality. And so all the different languages and the different symbols that flow from this language of light, it's almost like the one language shattered, and it's shattered into these beautiful fragments of sound and sound bites. And then humans came along and we started to play with them, and perhaps also other species in other, dimensions also play with the language. And so there's, language is so, like, I can give you something like an idea of how subtle I feel it is. Like, one day I was walking in the mist in England, and I became aware of this other language dimension. I just was listening and I heard it, and it was almost like you could say it was the elf dimension, or it was the Deva dimension. And I realized that their language was hugely more subtle than ours, and I started to see it in shapes of trees and reflections of light in puddles and sounds of like drops of rain or things like that. And so there's these subtle grains of language that run through creation, that if you're attuned to them, you can read the language, and and it's everywhere in nature. Nature is the great bedding of where all the languages come from. So if we're really listening to nature, and if you've ever done psychedelics, which I'm sure you have, and I'm sure many people listening to this have, you begin to tune into these other language streams and strands. And so for me, when I came to kind of write my own tome, the Gene Keys, which I didn't know was going to be this big thing, I just sort of settled into this formula that had come from China, this I Ching, and I used the art of contemplation of each of those kind of, I guess they're like letters, each of those hexagrams, those shapes, each one is a fractal aspect of the whole, is an archetype, a living archetype of wisdom, an encyclopedia of wisdom. And so how I kind of thought, how am I possibly going to capture like an entire language that's contained in that symbol that opens up into a whole fractal universe of its own? So when I came to write Gene Key's book, I thought, okay, well, let's just do it through the human range. Let's make it practical. So that's why I chose these words very, very carefully. 3 layers of words for each gene key, for each gift, a shadow, a gift, and then a siddhi, siddhi from the Sanskrit, meaning kind of divine revelation or divine gift. And out of those 3 words came a spectrum, and that spectrum also is a great word, because it involves the idea of color and grade and tone and frequency. And so when I started to write the gene keys, or it started to write itself through me, I was writing the book of the universe, if you like. And these 64 codes, I realized they were embedded not just in our DNA through having 64 codons, but also in the musical universe through the 8 octaves, through the phi ratios, through through the architecture of life itself, and even through time. Like the cycles of time. And so I began to see the whole universe woven of these language patterns. And I was writing the human language pattern, which is what the Gene Keys is. So it shows you these 64 codes. And I was just writing it, and I didn't know how to use it at all. That came later. And the profiles.
Did it feel like trying to climb Mount Everest?
Yeah.
Like, were you like, holy shit, I know what this is? Or were you like, oh, just little, like it's building up to a Kublai Khan over time? Like, how did it feel? Like, while you're processing this, did you feel like a vessel for the Tao? Or like, it seems like you kind of got the download. I mean, for me, this is one of the more profound. There's certain chunks in human evolution that seem, like Da Vinci with perspective, Shakespeare, all the literature at one point was like, okay, let's get woke. It seems like you really kind of grokked some fundamental things. I don't know how obviously conscious of it to a degree, but it's like, did you feel like it was once again like that kind of energy flowing through you kind of thing, or were you like,
just briefly to tie this in right here, because it may relate, and you speak of the codons, and that's, I'm sure you have material that I just haven't scoped where I explain this in more detail, but I'm also certain that you're aware of Bruce Lipton and biology of belief. Mm-hmm. And at least for me, it greatly assisted, even though by now I'm good with not understanding everything in detail if I understand the principle. And what you've written there also really helped me in a sense to tie this together even more. Maybe there's something you can even speak on that in terms of the, I don't know, biological connection, or just actually what it's about is the idea of this absolute self-empowerment.
Yeah. Well, I think if because I've told you a lot of the story that led up to this, so you can put all those pieces together and you realize, wow, I was trained as a deep embodied body worker, working in the belly, and the belly is the source of all kind of the energy meridians in our being. And all the different systems of our being kind of have in the navel, there's this kind of
the dantian kind of thing.
The dantian, the one point, the central point of our being, if you like, the Ouroboros, that's just deep in there. And that was that's where the language all emerges from. So it was only later when I kind of learned a little bit about DNA and those patterns. And I've still, I'm not a kind of, I'm very honest about this. I'm not a scientist. I'm kind of a poet first and foremost. And so what you get, through my poetic training, I was able to kind of look through that kind of logical lens of contemplating those codes and then let the poetry just come. And so it was a strange mix of the kind of left brain logic and then this poetic interpretation that came, and those two streams came together in me as I wrote that book, and it sort of wrote itself very easily. And I wrote it, first of all, I wrote the 64. I didn't do them in any particular order. I did them in a random order. And I have no record of that order either. And I remember some of them coming towards the end, and the big ones like the 55 that shook me. But that's another story. But when I'd done the first, I got all 64 of them. I kind of looked at it, and it had taken me a couple of years, and I thought I need to go into this again. And so I went back in, and then I rewrote another whole vein and expanded it and cleaned it up and perfected it and equalized, because some of the earlier ones were not as kind of defined as the later ones, where I'd sort of learned and I'd matured as I wrote. So going back in was really important to kind of equalize all the keys so that each one felt complete. And each one had to feel complete, and I could not let go of it until it felt complete. And
that is a perfectionist kind of layer of the Virgo. It sounds like you coaxed a wolf out of the woods, and over time, it's like White Fang, you developed a relationship, and now you're teaching it some tricks even, dare I say.
Yeah. I mean, it's a strange feeling when I finished as well, because then I finished, and then I wrote the introduction at the end. And once I'd finished the whole book, I just sat back, and I had this kind of shudder that went through me of I don't know what it was. It was this feeling of like, that is some book that's just come through you. I knew what I'd written. No, and I just knew that this was like this. I hadn't even written it. It just got written. But I kind of had this sensation of like, this book is going to cause a stir. And I had no idea how, and I just knew it in my bones. I was like, this is, I don't know. I kind of felt this shudder in me of the power of the book, and how it had come from DNA itself. It had come from one person's DNA. It had been written from my DNA. It had been written from my embodied kind of understanding. And that's not to say it's perfect, because it's just my version. And in a way, everyone could write their own. It was sort of it's sort of a new form of the I Ching, if you like. And it's only later that I realized that there were lots of ways to use it, and I'm still uncovering new ways of using it. Because just reading it is okay. It's like, that's one thing, but it's not really a readable book to me. I wouldn't sit down and read that book, because it's like, wow. It's more mystical than that. I'd want to kind of move through it in a mysterious way. So then the profiling system came, and lots of other routes of using it have come and are still growing. So yeah, it's still very much at work inside me, and still coming out in a way. It hasn't stopped. Yeah.
And
Well, it seems like almost like a base camp. Oh, go ahead, Raphael.
No, just because the synchronization pops up in my head, and we talk about genetics, codons, and I just have to ask, to whatever degree you're willing to comment, if you have any experience with ayahuasca, especially given your understanding of, embodiment and let's say varying types of psychic abilities. I'd be curious, because it's just, at least to me, in my experience, and this is not a very common theme, snakes come up, and this whole strange, genetic theme also comes up somehow.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because I hadn't done psychedelics. I'd done like some mushrooms, as I said, when I was younger, and I did them in a very kind of powerful way, quite a few times, exploring, the inner states and meditating with them. But then when my kind of 20s fell away, that part of my journey stopped, and I got married, and I started having children, and that was just a different phase of my life. And then I guess it's only been in the last 5 years where occasions have arisen where I was in, like one a couple of years ago, where for the first time I took some substances, having, after having gone through all this and having written the book. And, so I didn't know what the gene keys were through that lens. I hadn't looked through that psychedelic lens at what I created. So I had this experience of, for the first time, looking at life, having created this thing, if you know what I mean. And so I took some,
Yes,
with some friends. I took some mushrooms and some MDMA and a cocktail of, stuff that he provided. And for the first time I looked around, and we were deep in nature, and I just, we were in the forest in Vermont, deep in the woods. And I looked around, and every tree I looked at, I could tell you its gene key, and I could tell you its line, and every leaf and everything, everywhere I looked, I could see the code and the pattern. I was like, wow, this is just everywhere, embedded in every. So it was, and I haven't done ayahuasca, and it's not been part of my journey. It may be still, but I know that many people work with the gene keys and the ayahuasca, and yeah, you're right. You see, because you experience the living vehicle of the DNA at work inside you, through the serpent path and the serpent energy, and that's very much what is the energy in the book itself. It has a serpentine. The language itself is coded from that place, from that Kundalini place. So it's a book that when you read it, I used to joke in the early days, it's a book that talks to your DNA. It's a book that actually, as you read it, it reprograms your DNA. And I don't talk about that too much now, because
I believe that to be the case, for the record. Just so you know,
and
when
just
I
to
read
say
it,
again,
it's real.
Not just talking about believing something, but again, everyone check out Bruce Lipton, Biology of Belief. It is explained that our gene expression is contingent upon our beliefs. And, if we can program ourselves with the bad variants of consumerist culture, we may as well program ourselves, in terms of Homo sanctus, which is a term you coined, I believe, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the future human, the true human, the sacred human. But yeah, it's because DNA.
Reminds me a little of Bowie's "The Golden Ones" or whatever. It's like, we're going this way.
Yeah, and DNA is as a language, it's very similar to our language. Which is why the words we use are super important, because they literally are recognized by the DNA inside us. So the way we think about someone else, the way we talk about someone, is programming the field, literally, and the DNA of that person hears it and takes it in, whether they're near you or not. And so you begin to realize that every thought and every word is carrying this frequency embedded in it, and it returns to you. And so this is the mechanics of the minutiae of karma at work. And when you really understand that, it really kind of changes your reality. You realize, oh my goodness, everything I say and think is programming my bio vehicle, my reality, and the field itself. And the field is then rippling and responding. That means I need to be super careful, what I think and what I say and what I do. And that gives you a sense of real powerful inner discipline of like, wow, I really want to create beauty in the world. And it doesn't mean you kind of do a spiritual bypass either, that you have to take in the shadow energy as well. And that's what I learned, obviously, from, the earlier teachings in my life. Like, you've got to kind of harness the energy of the shadow and allow it to transmute itself. That was the teaching of Mantak Chia, the alchemy. You start with the base material, and you spin it, and it transforms and it quickens, and then it raises its frequency, and then it eventually becomes light. It becomes this energy inside us that's kinetic, that moves through us, that's creative. It becomes creativity. It becomes genius. And even further, it becomes awakening. It becomes revelation. It becomes compassion. It becomes these cities, these heightened states, even the miraculous. It becomes miraculous. And it allows us to read the sacred hidden languages of creation. And, and this is the Homo Sanctus, the future human, or it's in a way it is, I call it that, but it is the now human as well. But it hasn't yet been fully opened up. It's still waiting inside our DNA to kind of come online. and it's a completely different way of being. It's a human that's collective in nature. It's humanity. Humanity itself is the human. So we can't. That's why we have to take in the shadow, because in order to get to that highest state of consciousness, we have to embrace the shadow in every person. And so when we look at the world and we see kind of all kinds of aberrations of truth, and we see all kinds of difficult things to look at, and difficult behaviors and tyrannical behaviors, it's just the shadow. It's the shadow consciousness at work. And everywhere we see it, we have to embrace it with our love, as Christ taught, as Buddha taught, as these great, mages have taught. And so, yeah, Gene Keys and my life also has had this prophetic energy running through it as well, which I kind of knew as a boy, but then sort of lost until it came back, I think, at that time I told you about, when the energy awakened in me again and the search began.
If I may, I would like to provide a real-life example through what you mentioned, in a sense, also the prophesizing part. So I just opened up my hologenetic profile, and one of the main 4 cornerstones, radiance part, is 52-2, which is the shadow is stress, then the gift is restraint, and the city is stillness. And I believe that this is the one, if I'm not mistaken now, whereas within the city part, so, a few years ago I was reading through this, and I already had done some of my work. Who knows what I've done in other or parallel lives. So this is always the fun part, like when you're far advanced in one life quickly, does it mean you're so great, or does it just mean you've had plenty of other incarnations or whatever? But anyways, so I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, I'm good here. And then you start reading the city parts and you're like, okay, this sounds good. Okay. And then it goes into, you would say, superpowers, which of course are just normal human abilities. And one of the aspects, and I believe it was the stillness part, read something along the lines of, then you will be able to create a field, whereas at sync, I would say now, the mental superfluous processes of individuals within your vicinity will be completely shut down.
Mm-hmm.
Is that maybe the stillness city, if you know by heart? Or certainly it is one that occurs within that, one of those. And so I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, how could this ever happen to me? I am quite airy, so lots of mental processes going on. And how should it ever happen that then in my vicinity someone would have no thought? And then eventually I got into, 3 years later, into doing conscious channeling, and doing this for several friends and different people, and in this case doing a one-on-one session with a friend of mine, and I channel and we talk, and it was a kind of serious dolphin connection. And then at some point she's saying, oh, I have no more questions, I'm just feeling good. And she later explained just what is explained in the city, and I was like, oh, so apparently these things, I mean, it's all real. Of course it is, but yeah, just to provide a real life example. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Raphael. It is. And, when you read the 55th gene key, there's a piece in there, and it's a very prophetic one now, obviously. And if you're reading the book, that's a good one to dive straight into. And there's a piece in there called The Stilling of the Wave. And it describes how these cities may come into the world. So if even one of them is made manifest through a human being, if one of them is turned on, it floods the field of humanity. So that's why one person attaining realization has a vast effect on the totality, because it reaches, like the shadow doesn't have that capacity. It kind of it stays on its plane. It's low frequency plane, and even though it adds to the general noise, it doesn't have that incredible capacity to reach into every single human being. Whereas the city, the moment it comes online, it touches every single human being instantaneously. That stillness, a little bit of that stillness is incarnated into the whole of humanity. And so you actually, to transfer transform humanity, you actually only need a certain number of these cities, so a certain number of awakened ones. And I think this has been a story that humanity has kind of tracked in different legends and myths over the
Like
eons.
144,000 and all this kind of stuff.
Exactly, the chosen ones, the whatever, the chosen people, and of course it's a really great one for spiritual egos to get sidetracked into, but it's a beautiful indication of where we're heading. That there's a flowering coming, and it only takes a certain number to trigger the irreversible kind of a full awakening of humanity, and therefore the very fast transmutation of vast amounts of ancient shadow material, you could call it.
I was going to say it's very much like a tipping point in alchemy.
Yeah,
it's like once you hit a point, like 100th monkey threshold, it's like it has its own momentum at that point. Yeah. Whether it's quantum entanglement or however one wants to label this, it seems like I do agree. Like, and I don't know about your presuppositions in terms of yugas and things like that, but it seems like it's been a very dense field to try to punctuate, but it's one we've chosen, so it's not like, I mean, this obviously presuppositions Raphael's more on the wave. It's like the Bashar wave, where it's like, yo, this is all not solipsism exactly, but it's like this is exactly where we need to be. Like every shadow light gift is like, it's where it needs to be. So at some point you start hitting a terminal velocity or whatever, and it's just like, yo, and it seems you've alluded to this in the book with, I mean, I obviously wrote it before 2012 and on for me has been insane. That's when I started, doing a lot of psychedelics. I don't do them so much now, but that's when Team Rabbit Hole became a thing. That's when I met Raphael. Terrence McKenna was all about, the transcendental object at the end of time. We're starting to go through this portal in 2012. Obviously, in your work, you talk about going from the, I don't know if it's your work specifically or if it's human design, and then you're echoing it, but the ajna to the solar plexus at 2027 kind of shift. It seems like we're right in the birth canal. We walk in the moment, or so to speak, and I haven't had children. My fiance is British, but I don't think we're going to get kids. So it feels like we've walked into the room collectively. Like if we were to take a snapshot, it's like, oh, there's a woman. She's crowning. She's screaming. There's blood everywhere. The husband's fainted. Like, the doctor's like not in the room yet. Like someone's freaking out going to get him. Like, but it's happening. Like this seems like we've hit a moment, probably 2012 and on. And that might tie into the 55 that you were talking about, because in the book, the Gene Key book, it says, and I've taken it quite literally, like, don't read this like 1 to page 500 or whatever, right? It's like actually somebody who's going to come on the podcast who made a kind of oracle card deck from your book, Elijah, I think is his name. I bought his deck. He's going to come on. He's friends with Gemini Brit, who's cool. And
you'll love him.
Yeah, we've been having scheduling issues, but that's life these days, ain't it? So, but yeah, I pulled those cards with my fiance. We read the thing. I've got 55, and she's got 22. So those are like, kind of this as above, so below kind of weird thing going on. I'm kind of curious what the experience of writing the 55 was. You alluded to it earlier. I am kind of curious about that anecdote. And then it feels like that 55 is talking about, the dragonfly kind of mutating randomly. It seems like that's the 2012 situation. We've hit a crescendo point where things are just ready to go in a new direction, from, aquatic beast to flying thing or whatever. Mm. The conch is yours.
Yeah. No, it took me by surprise, that Gene Key, when it came to be written. And I was in San Francisco at the time, and I'm not sure I've told this story, but visiting a really dear friend of mine, like a soul sister, who's a poet and an incredible pianist, like one of the top pianists in the US. And I was with her, and we get together every few years, and we met at the Mantak Chia thing years and years ago. She's a meditator, a deep meditator, very silent in a woman, and we would come together, and it's like a holiday from samsara when we're together, because there's no there's just an instant drop in, and there's no kind of clutter of ego at all, or anything like that. And she's Oriental, And so we were having we were having lunch in a kind of really nice restaurant, and and it came time for dessert, and we were having this incredible conversation. I was talking to her about, I was in the middle of writing the Gene Keys book, and I was talking to her about DNA and the language of music, and she started to talk to me about music, from being a great pianist and her subtle understanding of music. And we entered this incredible realm of insight together. And then this huge piece of cheesecake came between us. And because we ordered this one New York cheesecake or something, and we're in this incredibly refined thought realm. And then this cake arrived, and we looked at it and we laughed. And I remember her saying to me, "I wonder what transmission is hiding in that cake." It was like a great moment. Anyway, so we ate the cake, and when I got home, I started to write the 55, and so it's always been a bit of a joke for me that the proof is in the pudding, or those sayings, that something very dense often contains the deepest story, or the deepest and subtlest revelation. And I'm not saying it was the cake, but it was a good symbol again, and I love symbols, as you can tell. So then I started to write that, or it started to write itself, and it was much longer than any of the other keys, and I just went with it. And it contained this really strong prophetic stuff. And I was writing, I was going, oh my God, do I really want to put this in? Is this really going to come in? I just kept going with it, and it kept going. And this is what the future is going to look like. And then there's going to be these children, and then we're going to change our education, and then the science is going to change, and the environment is going to get healed, and all these things. And it was positive and upbeat, and but
very
kind of
Rainbow Warrior prophecy kind of Hopi style.
Yeah, absolutely. But then it was balanced out when I wrote the 22, which was the last Gene Key I wrote, and I'd been very sick, and my whole family had been sick, and I was sort of dragging myself around trying to take care of my wife and kids, and I was really sick, and it was terrible. Because the last thing you can do when you're really ill is take care of someone else, and you had all these sick kids as well, and it was terrible. It was a real low point of my life. And as I came out of that illness, I saw really clearly the 22nd Gene Key, which was about the nature of suffering, and I wrote it, and it kind of balanced out the prophecy of the 55 in a way, because it showed what it was rooted in. All that hope and that rainbow prophecy is rooted in the transmutation of the suffering through the divine feminine, and it was the deep feminine transmission, and that was where I kind of started to realize that the more and more that the feminine was going to kind of be given power in the world and given back its power, and it's been my huge joy to see that coming to fruition. And and many incredible women who've been drawn to Gene Keys and these teachings, and men as well, but the majority are really empowered women, and I see them taking it out there into different countries, into different languages and nations, and translating the work, and then passing it on, and it's a real privilege. I feel like I'm in this incredibly privileged movie, and I'm sort of watching, because I'm still doing my work, but I've done my kind of major piece of work, and now I'm watching and seeing these incredible allies coming and taking it out further, and many of them taking it further than I could, with my kind of slightly limited skill set, because there's a lot of things I'm not so good at. So, yeah.
Well, like I was saying earlier, it's kind of like a base camp you've made on Everest, and it had to be established. A lot of people have been looking this way, whatever, human evolution has been kind of going this trajectory. And whether you look at it as a recapitulation of the I Ching, kind of like David D'Angelo's the Starman Tarot that I read it, or the Rider-Waite deck got redone by Crowley, that kind of thing. There could be recapitulations of themes, so I definitely sense that. But it also feels that just the zeitgeist. I mean, this gets weird because I mean, I don't know if you believe like this is an eternal moment in our, linear perspective of it's like an illusion or, how you view time like that. But it feels like we're in a qualitatively different moment than anything before us, particularly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the magic of the 55 and 22, where it's like the 55 seems to me like kind of like from apes to angels, like we're rising from, the earth and trying to reach for the stars. Whereas like the angels coming in and, down and dwelling with us or whatever, that's more the 22, where it's like we'll help you get there. Like we want you to come join us, like you're our dream actually, and we're gonna like cradle you into this embryonic stage that we find ourselves in now. It's funny that you said that. Do you find that more women are into gene keys than men, because it is more intuitive feeling? So that might be part of it. Like what's the demographic of reaction that you're kind of getting from
I think
the people?
Anywhere where there's an awakening community, it's more women than men, mostly. But and I think there's like really powerful reasons for that. And it's not to say that the men aren't empowered as well, because there's some incredible men who are like anchor points in the in my life and in my community. But it's no longer really about men and women. It's actually about the feminine itself returning, and that can be through a man or a woman, or it can be in lots of different ways. The earth, of course, and as you said, the intuitive understanding of wisdom as opposed to knowledge, because we live in a knowledge-based society, which is a masculine approach. Science is inherently masculine. And then wisdom is inherently feminine in that sense. Not that it's the kind of, it belongs to women, but the woman's body for sure emanates wisdom. But then so does a man's in a different way. So what I'm saying is, I think it's clear what I'm saying, that the awakening is coming through the rebalancing of the feminine that has been misappropriated, misunderstood, misjudged, mistreated by religion, science, and just about everything and everyone for a long, long time. So there's this incredible, I see it as the third part of the Trinity, and when the third, it's like the Irish say, they have a saying, 3 is the charm, and when the third part comes, then everything is tied together by that third component of the Trinity. And it's and that's the phase that we're in now. We're the kind of, as you said, apes to angels, and it's an incredible acceleration, which means it's a bottleneck, which means there's incredible stresses about, as happens at every birth, incredible stresses to come. And if you think about this year, 2020, and how much has happened in this.
And 20 is the judgment card in major arcana. It's just like, whoa, it's a big year.
Yeah, so you think about just that 1 year, how much has been compressed into that 1 year. And then you think of 2027, 7 years away, 6 years away. You think, what is going to happen between now and then? Really contemplate that. How much change is going to be compressed into this bottleneck of time? And I'm not setting up 2027 as like a kind of golden moment where everything's perfect at all. But I'm just saying that it's a key date in the awakening process, and that these years to come are like years of real kind of the laying out of, on the outside, I believe, the kind of decline of modern civilization. And on the inside, the rising up of this incredible future human in specific places and areas. And those two things, the decline of the outer civilization and the rising up of the new, the new spiritual, is like they're intimately combined, and they're, beautifully captured in Ra-Uru, who's, the founder of human design, who kind of tracked these dates for the first time, really kind of found them in the patterns of his system. He called it the cross of the sleeping phoenix. And there was this beautiful expression. He was a poet himself in many ways, and a musician. And that was that's exactly what we are. It's a sleeping phoenix that's awakening and rising up out of the ashes. As the ashes crumble, this new creature emerges. And of course, you have to be realistic. I'm a Virgo, as you say. It's going to take a long time, for that to get embedded, because we have to go, in time, space, on the material plane, things move, even choke points, where things get really under stress, even they take time, and then the healing takes time. So we're going to have to go through some difficult times, I would say, lying ahead. And I think that's what we're all preparing for.
Dare I say we signed up for this? I mean, it seems like that. It feels like, I don't know about you, but like ground crew of a new Aeon or something. It's like, you know what? It's a little slippery between the zodiac signs, if you want to get into Age of Aquarius and all this kind of stuff, but it's the most interesting, the most novel. I know Raphael has spoken about Bashar mentioning 2027 being, Raphael, what were you saying the other day about that specifically?
There are, of course, oftentimes like certain namings for certain years and so on. For 2027, it is called the contact fulcrum. So supposedly, yet again, a very important decision point in time-space, in which it, in a sense, shall be decided if, and if no, or if yes, how we would relate to, let's just say, etheric entities, where it's about time, just as you mentioned, starting to listen to nature first, which is even within Bashar's storyline about the cryptics and their own supposed, let's say, shamanism track in a future timeline. They also equally start by communing with nature. So I think that's the direction we're headed, to recognize ourselves as nature, and then I think it'll all be fine.
It will all be fine.
And it's kind of funny. I want to ask you a couple more questions, but we've been talking for a little bit, so I didn't know where you were personally on your kind of clock. Like, are you winding out of energy?
Let's keep going until we're done.
Word. Yeah, and obviously, like, whenever you want to pull the plug, I mean, I'll probably the next half an hour or so, we'll be like, all right, cool, thanks, come back on. But yeah, I knew you'd be fascinating to talk to because I could just get that from your writing. I'm like, okay, this is dope, and on my wave, and it's magical, but it's not beyond belief, I guess, is what Raphael was kind of saying, where it's like grounded, and it seems like reasonable is too strong of a word, but kind of what you're alluding to. I mean, it's exactly correct, but it's not so like, ground tethered that it's not going to soar or whatever. It allows you to soar. It gives you the wings of Icarus. Just don't go too far with it, and you'll be fine. So what we're kind of getting at, though, it seems, is the rise of the feminine and the rebalancing. It seems like that, because I don't think anybody, I mean, I'm not sure, but like, a Xenia warrior princess, kind of everyone gets castrated world is an equal opposite of kind of what we've been dealing with.
No.
So I don't think we're trying to gun for that. It seems that, well, what is your personal, like, kind of position on, like, the nature of causal necessity? Like, do you think these are like everything that happens has to occur that way? Do you believe in like a multiverse where it's whatever your heart desires and you kind of resonate towards a universe where that is? Like, in some way, like what we're talking about, the subjugation of the feminine, through the patriarchy over the past few thousand years, it seemed that was a necessary. It's kind of like a bicycle riding, where it's like you're falling gracefully. You like pedal on one side, then you pedal on the other, but it's like you're moving forward always. It seems like that was kind of that pedal mode, where it's like we're going to find language, and we're going to kind of discover the material world through sciences, and we're going to, like, colonize and map. It seems we're kind of hitting the limits of that, even in cosmology. Like, we've seen the background radiation of the Big Bang, so it's like we can't really go beyond that. We're hitting limits in our kind of, informers, if you want to put it that way, and we're going to have to kind of start doing a broad, like the heights maybe have been reached. Now it's about the width of it and the depth of it. What are your positions, like, are you, and I don't want to pigeonhole you, like, the more Buddhist Taoist thing, is it like it is what it is, just deal with it, ride the waves of the the hexagram that's at hand? Or how do you look at free will? Because some of the cities are like, you're just along for the ride as consciousness in a vehicle that's signed up for certain prescriptions, and you kind of just gotta deal with it. And then that's not disempowering, but it's a little bit more kind of fatalistic in a way, which I'm not against necessarily. Yeah, I'll shut up. You kind of see what I'm saying, though.
No, it's a great question. I guess, each city speaks its own kind of enlightened language and has its own way of answering that question that you've just asked, right? So if you asked the Taoist, the 10th city, which is the being, the city of being, then probably the answer would be something like what you said, like just go with it, just let it be. There's nothing to do here. Everything's perfect. It just is. It's perfect. You can trust it. You could just open your heart to it, and it's that's one response. And it has truth laced right at the core of it, especially when it's spoken by an awakened being who's manifesting that city, because then it radiates out. The enlightened language actually penetrates you. For me, because it is one of the nice little kind of harmonics of the Gene Keys and me is that I happen to have the 64th city, 63 and 64 in my profile, and they're my kind of
programming yourself.
Yeah, so it's kind of nice in a way. There's a nice little pattern that I have the final ones in, so you're going to get the answer from me through those ones. And those ones are interesting because they're kind of like the end of the book. When you've read a book and then you go in and then there's all the glossary at the end, and it's sort of like that. I'm the glossary, right? So that's why I wrote the book, because I've got to the end and finished with it, so I can go back and kind of understand it. So the answer to your question from me is that there are so many layers of subtlety and dimensions to answer that question. Like, there are layers to karma, and there are layers of free will and determinism, and and there's so you cannot the subtlety of understanding the language of light is that it's very difficult to kind of pigeonhole one truth, especially if you're a 63, 64. If that's what I wouldn't land on any one, but I love them all, and they all point to the same thing. So the answer's in the book, and because all those paths are true, but there's slightly different variations of understanding the truth, and so I can't kind of fully answer it by pointing to any one. I can just show you.
Don't feel bad. I hear exactly what you're dropping.
Yeah,
so it's kind of like Dark Side of the Moon. It's white light, and then it splinters into frequency bands, and every band is true for what it is, but it's all disseminating from that one light.
Like my story, I'm an adventurer and a traveler and a voyager, so I love to voyage along them, and so I can pick and choose which ones I'm on right now, and surf that one this day, and then tomorrow I might be surfing another one. Because that's my love. My love is the adventure itself, the adventure of consciousness itself, and its twists and turns and its subtleties. And as I said, it's endlessly subtle. It requires a very, very refined kind of supermind in a way to be able to kind of travel down those fractal highways. And it really requires the art of contemplation, which is something that has become more and more important in my teaching. Like, and I don't know if either of you read my little book on contemplation, but this year
I intend to.
Yeah, no, it's like it's a distillation of the whole of the Gene Keys book into like under 90 pages, but it doesn't mention any Gene Keys. So it's like this kind of little tiny, it's my Zen book, and there's not, there are far fewer words, but they're very carefully chosen and ordered, and it lays out a very beautiful technique, which is called the art of contemplation, which is the answers are inside us, and if we know how to pause, because pausing is the first aspect of the art of contemplation. It has 3 layers. If you know how to pause at every level in your being, then that kind of higher mind can begin to function in you. and those gifts can become those cities, but only if you have the kind of capacity to slow down and pause, because to contemplate means to digest, to mill something, to kind of really take your time with something and let it kind of sink in, and then you see the nuances and the the kind of subtleties, and that's when you become a master, if you can slow down that much. So the art of contemplation requires that we learn to pause in our everyday life. It's very practical, so this little teaching is really, really practical. And anyone listening to this, if you're interested, you can either go to Amazon and get the book, or you can go to genekeys.com, and probably by the time you've heard this, there'll be a little mini course that you can buy that's very, very cheap, that you can that will take you on a journey into the art of contemplation alongside the book. And it's just coming out soon, that one. And it's such a beautiful thing, because inside pauses, the second phase is called pivoting. And you might recognize shadow gift city in this, so pause, pivot, and the third is called merge. So in the pause, as you kind of come into contact with the shadow, there's a pivot, there's a process of transmutation that takes place in the pause. As you're just sitting there, you're just milling something, you're just receiving an energy, or it could be a difficulty, or it could be a discomfort in your body, it could be a pain, it could be an emotion that and you're just allowing it this space. And then this pivot occurs, and you can never predict when the pivot will occur. You can do 20 pauses in a day, and maybe one of them will be a pivot. Or you can do 100 pauses in a week, and maybe none of them will be a pivot, but maybe the next week, one of them, something magical will occur, and something will shift inside you, and that pattern will change, and a gift will emerge. And the more of those flowers that start kind of emerging in those pauses in your life and in your thoughts and in your feelings, then you start to enter into the field of merging. And merging is where the city comes alive, because the city actually is not, in some respect, it's not inside us at all. It's the field itself. So it requires that we merge, and the pivots, the transmutations, the gifts, as we follow them into the world, they take us into this field of, we begin to re-merge back into creation, and the quantum life starts to kind of come alive in us again in a new way. And then because of that, we have access to higher dimensions, because our body responds, our biology responds to those higher frequencies by creating, new neural pathways and manufacturing new hormones inside our endocrine system that allow us to then transcend, like those trips that we have, on those high points, if we take ayahuasca or something like that. But then our body actually—
You can do it naturally, for the record. I mean, I've done it, astral projection without drugs. It's like, oh shit, you just have to condition the boat to be faced the right way for the wind to catch. It's just like that.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. So that the body is a laboratory that can create those elixirs quite on its own, and it can then create them and recreate them over and over and over. And in a way, that's what the body wants to do. It's its secret purpose. It's its highest purpose. It's dreaming of doing that. This body. It's like everything in nature wants to transcend. So, and our body is no exception. So, for me, it all comes back to the body. So, the art of contemplation is about that deep process of embodiment, and how we enter into that wider field, that quantum field. Yeah, so in a way, that's the core of the Gene Keys teachings, that this technique that begins with the art of pausing. So it's a very simple thing. It's very, the deepest truths are the simplest. So that's really what I'm teaching now. I'm just saying, hey guys, pause more often.
It reminds me a little of the end of the movie. I'm forgetting what it's called, but about that American traveler who goes up to Alaska. Eddie Vedder did the soundtrack. I'm totally spacing on what it's called. But it was a kind of a big movie, maybe 5-10 years ago. Into the Wild, that's what it's called. Yeah, and it's like his epiphany at the very end, kind of like after he's eaten the wrong berries. He wasn't a Virgo, clearly. He was like, oh shit, there's a vein on this. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But I guess it's his dharma or whatever. So yeah, I mean the whole point is like, there's very small like a firework makes a lot of noise and all this stuff, but the moment of sonic boom is very simple in and of itself. And everything emanating from that. So I do agree. It's fascinating reading about the cities because I do appreciate the element where you're saying to the effect where it's like, and this is fucked with my head a little, and I haven't really talked about this with Raphael, but I've talked about it with my fiance, where it's like everybody's coming in at a different angle of approach, and some people, it's not pearls to swine necessarily, but it's like some people are not going to be able to understand or digest food that is for an individual. Like, so if you like your 64 city, you were saying, like that might not at all be on the menu for somebody else. They might be coming to it from a very different angle of approach, but they all end up being kind of unified in a very kind of quantum metaphysical way, or however I'm trying to say this. But it's funny because I think one of the maybe not shadows of the new age, it's hard to explain, but shadows of just being an intellectual human trying to pursue truth through time, like what we've been doing with mystery schools and everything over time as humans. It seems like someone might be able to fast for 40 days and that's like their way in, whereas if you get somebody else a 40-day fast, they might go crazy and die or whatever, whereas all they had to do was just go be of service in the soup kitchen. And they were going to hit it, So it's funny. There's a kind of a ironic, I mean, maybe it's too strong a word, but like very humbling kind of approach where it's like, y'all, there's 64 keys. I mean, not gene keys, but like keys into like fucking the pearly gates here. It's like you can get there, but like don't shove your key in someone's face and say that's it, because that might not be appropriate.
Totally. And that was one of the things I realized when I'd written the Gene Keys book, is I realized this is a kind of code book for enlightenment, and and because it would show you this is what your enlightenment looks like, but then you can't recreate that in your mind, like, oh, okay, I'm going to go and do. It's like it's just a reflection, and your contemplation is what actually unlocks it. But then you can look at the book and you can consider the city. You can go, well, actually, yeah, I am actually manifesting that path, but not because I read the book. It just happens anyway. But the book seems to be confirming it. And that's what. It's
the finger pointing at the moon.
Yeah.
It's like it helps give that directionality to it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really what it's for. And I'll just finish by saying about the book that, the book and all the teachings, they're all just an excuse, And really, I saw this like early on. I saw that all the work I'm putting in, all the creativity and all the kind of building of systems and online courses and virtual retreats and all of that. It's only to draw in this one group of humans who have to find each other at this time through these teachings. So it's like it's actually all just for bringing the people together, so that they can fall in love, so that they can recognize their soul family, and stick around in the teaching. I think that's for me why the teaching have to be quite dense, because it keeps you there a little longer. And as you stay longer, you kind of fall more in love, whether it's with yourself, whether it's with another, or with the teachings. You stick around longer, and so it's a trick in that way. It's just a trick to bring us together. And it's the coming together where the magic is, because when we come together in these group souls, and we've done our shadow work, or we're doing our shadow work, and we're supporting each other in that group consciousness is far more powerful than any teaching on this planet. It's extraordinary, and that's how we're going to awaken. And I know that I've kind of seen this, like we have to be in rooms or in spaces or in nature, in specific groups together for decent amounts of time in silence. And that's when the cities will begin to touch down. When the people have done that, when we've done our shadow work, and we've found each other in the right choreography. And then we come together at specific times and specific places, and then something will come in. This higher quantum acidic energy will be able to land, because it's so powerful. It requires a collective to kind of generate it, and then it gets triggered in the individual. And that's why this is a collective awakening. It's deeply mysterious. And I love watching the movie, because I'm just sitting here on my seat going, oh, wow, look, there's another, really interesting group coming together over there. And it's just, it's fun. It's just, we need that sense of kind of, this is fun.
Reminds of Alan Watts. He says, we take serious what the gods made for fun. I mean, we are coming into, I don't know about, ontological positions particularly, but it's like, it seems like we chose, Raphael's always telling me, it's like, we forgot to remember. Like, this is just a weird kind of unearthing of treasure we buried ourselves, almost like a time capsule. So it's like, it was the case before, and then we said, if we're going to bury it real deep, and we're going to have the right tools and timing and everything to eventually unearth this. And when we do, we're going to laugh and curtain call it and say, that was dope. Thanks everyone for playing the game, or whatever's going to happen. So, I'm kind of, we can start winding it down here. I do want to have you back on and kind of geek out about specifics. At some point, don't worry about, it's not tomorrow or anything like that, but you're an awesome guest, a brilliant mind, and a very interesting soul. So that's, you fit the bill for kind of what I want to, the kind of people I want to be talking to. It happens to be that you're a famous author or whatever, but it's like, you're cool no matter what. You're Team Rabbit Hole as fuck. So I guess 2 questions, and then we can kind of say our parting comments. We were just kind of saying a minute ago, we say it all the time. I heard it through Terence McKenna, but he got it from Timothy Leary, who had a kind of an extensive quote at one point about finding the others. We say that a lot on Team Rabbit Hole. It's like, there's people in your soul tribe. And this doesn't get into like exclusive tribalism at that level. I think we're transcending it, but there's people in your organ group, like, the facial area versus the stomach versus the fingers. Like, there's people that are on a similar wave pattern to you, and finding them and encourage, like, edifying each other through both, it's almost like a marriage, through the good times and the bad, like, not just abandoning people because the party's over or whatever, like being there at hard points too. It seems like that's the responsibility that our species is being called into. So I do appreciate your kind of illustrating that. It sounds like a Virgo wet dream or something, where it's like, everyone sit in silence in groups, and we're going to all be service for the whole, and a descent from on high will happen, and Shambhala or whatever. But it's beautiful, and I do really appreciate you coming on and doing the work. One quick question: why isn't there an app for this? I feel like is it in the works or something? Because I feel like this should be more widely accessible. The reason astrology is so big is because there's free app, websites to get your charts or whatever. I know that I got my chart free from genekeys.com. I'm pretty sure it's still doing that, but like, what's the logic there? Is it just like, have you not felt that, or are you working on that? And then no pressure.
Everybody wants, and just briefly, Richard, because I've been also discussing this with friends for years already. Everyone actually wants this super integrated dating app, I guess, eventually, both including gene keys, human design, and all of those things. But
I think we're it's been growing organically. My purpose, Gene Key, is patience, and so I've never rushed it, and just allowed it to unfold in its perfect timing, and it's just picking up speed, really, particularly this year. And so we will have an app in, by the middle of next year, by spring next year.
Well, no pressure. I'm just wondering, because I was like, this seems like a fucking big thing, and I'm just surprised that
it is. But it's had to, like, if you're going to create, if you think about it, like, if you're going to create, I don't do any of it. I'm not kind of planning this. It's just unraveling. And if you're going to have an app going to suddenly bring in thousands more people or millions more people, you need to have your kind of basic foundation really solid. And that's what we've been doing. I've been building a really great team. We've been building you're going to meet Elijah Parker. He's an awesome man. He has a mind as sharp as mine, if not more. He's like a younger, kind of hipper version of me. and it's like, and he's really been kind of the powerhouse behind the technology and building it and orchestrating that. And so
I guess I should direct this at him more.
Yeah.
And like Mark Bentley. I mean, I'm aware of some of the people that are doing stuff. Mark's going to come on the podcast.
Right.
Like your kind of ambassador stuff. Like it seems, and hey, mad props with the patience thing. I don't know your gene key chart, so it's like, okay, that makes sense. Like you don't want, an in utero 2-month-old fetus is not going to be running or whatever.
Just what you mentioned in Jim, and even here, because oftentimes people think about different projects and ideals and so on, and then I always say it comes down to the personnel, jokingly speaking, of course, but it comes down to the individuals and the psychology, and just like you said, the foundation must be proper. There is no point of having a great influx if then it's unstable unto itself, and if you don't have like a crystallization, and especially if you want to translate it to a new realm like digital in this way, there's even so many more factors to think about. But it's amazing that this is actually on track, so awesome.
It's coming, and also not so much a dating app, but I have the.
I was halfway joking, but just because there's so much, detail there and so many algorithms, even just with astrology.
Like programming
if you add in
and all that
human
stuff.
design and you add in gene keys, there are technically so many things one could calculate. Doesn't mean this would really then tell you this or that, but it would just be cool because you could just try verifying the whole thing from a new perspective.
Yeah, I have a chemistry app, a relationship chemistry app in the making. And but it's simpler, it's going to be juicy, and very very revealing, but it's going to be simple. It's not going to be complex like human design. It's going to be simple, but really kind of fun as well, and very very revealing. Because I don't want to kind of my thing is not to get too complicated. I want to keep things relatively simple, because gene keys is like this huge intricate field, but actually it's the same truth repeated over and over and over again in slightly different ways, iterations, and that's that's why it's poetry, because it's repeating the same truth through different lenses.
May I say, potentially, Richard, you created the perfect trap for enlightenment.
It's exactly, you're onto me, Raphael.
That's what's up. Well, Richard, I really do appreciate you giving us your time. You're Soul Tribe for sure. Thank you so much for putting in the effort that you have. I'm glad it was a pleasurable experience. It sounds like your adventures led you to where it was almost necessary. So good on you for, hitting the iron wall. It was there. I guess if you have any kind of parting thoughts, like I said, I want to get you on and pick your brain and geek out a little more next time, but I just want people to get to know who you are and kind of how you're approaching your magnum opus or whatever. And I do think there's a lot more to happen, but like, Disney started with a mouse. It's like, keep it simple. So I really do appreciate what you've done. Any kind of parting thoughts?
What can I say? I've got one more book to write. And so that's where I intend to spend my kind of older years. I think there's a lot still, as you said, to unravel. And I just say, if anyone's listening to this and they kind of are interested, then come and join and check out our community, our global family, and get involved and, bring your genius. And, that's what we're doing. We're merging genius, and we're working towards a kind of an amazing future that's coming. And at the same time, being deeply aware that there's a huge amount of suffering on this planet, and some of the most powerful tools in the gene keys are directly aimed at that suffering, at making that suffering easier to handle. I'm particularly alluding to this teaching called the Venus sequence, which maybe we can talk about next time. I'll drop that as a seed, because I'm doing a big retreat at the moment, online retreat. I don't know if either of you guys are on it. But a couple of thousand people currently globally going through a big online retreat, going through the healing of the sacred wound as it kind of works through our DNA. And so that's a really powerful program that you can find. And I think that's the place I wanted to end in a way, because that's the feminine, and it's the healing of the heart, of the human heart. And that's really, when you come down to it, that's the essence of what the Gene Keys is here to do, to open our hearts, to help us open our hearts and keep them open. and then the rest just gets taken care of. So yeah, love is the answer.
Well, allow me to say I wholeheartedly agree. I would like to thank you very, very much for joining, Jim.
Thanks, Raphael.
And of course, thank everyone for listening. Jim, your final words for this episode? You might have to unmute your mic.
Oh, my bad. Okay, so yeah, something we say a lot on here. I got it from Reaper Cheap from Narnia, fellow Brit of yours. But basically, further up and further in. This is a fractal. We get to enjoy the ride, and there's better and worse ways to do it. But being compassionate to yourself and others, finding the others, trying to enjoy the mystery. No, you can't figure it all out, but there's like hacks, and I really do think Gene Keys is a major turning point in our understanding of how to be. And in these interesting times, this might find you in a place where it upgrades you. No promises. Check it out, and if it resonates, definitely go further up and further into it. Thank you again, Richard, for giving us your time.
Thanks, Jim. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone, and enjoy yourselves.
Radio Okitalk.